Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. Sweater weather has arrived and I couldn't be more cozy. Today's episode is an initial debrief of what happened at the United States Professional Association for Transgender Health Conference over the weekend. The previous 2 episodes provide more context for this conversation if you want to head back there and take a listen. Before leaving the conference, I sat down with 3 colleagues, Isaac, Elijah, and Gus, for their reflections. In today's interview, the often used positioning of gender-affirming surgery as life-saving care to prevent suicide is critiqued. We also discussed embodiment, autonomy, informed consent, anti-fatness, and the way that non-binary people are becoming a third gender category. A note for listeners, this episode includes discussion of suicide and anti-fatness in medicine. To set the stage, we were in the suburbs of Denver, the Rocky Mountains visible from the vast window in the executive suite. Indeed, I did end up getting for the first 2 nights. The sunrises were full of reds, purples, and oranges, and the air was crisp and dry. There were about 1,000 people attending the conference in person, and a huge surprise for me was that I was seen at this conference. People weren't looking through me or around me as happened at UCSF's Trans Health Summit. Why the suburbs of Denver and not the city of San Francisco baffles me, but it was lovely. I also introduced myself to every Black person who looked in my direction this time, and we coordinated a happy hour meetup for the Black folks attending. We were absolutely the people laughing loudly in public, and I loved it. Those relationships grew and found many of us on the dance floor of a gay nightclub in Denver on Saturday night. I got to relive my 20s and also remember that I am now 41. For starters, I was able to host some colleagues in the executive suite, but the fireside interviews of my dreams did not manifest. However, a couple plastic surgeons did agree to record interviews in the future. One surgeon is interested in talking about how surgeons can be dehumanized in conversations about BMI and gender-affirming surgery, something that I'm interested in and also examining in myself. I'll also get to interview a second surgeon about the repeated message from USPATH leadership that when talking about trans care, we need to stick to the capital S science in the field and ensure that we're not labeled activists or advocates. Today's recap starts out ironically using some of the language that was a through line of many presentations we attended. My first experience and opportunity to make it awkward at the conference was a 3-hour course about neurodivergence in trans care. The 3 speakers were white and told us that they were going to, quote, center BIPOC in their presentation. It began with a land acknowledgement. Both of these cue that this group had been paying attention to what white people are supposed to do and say after 2020. And then the group didn't mention BIPOC people and our experiences in the context of the topic again. Even the multiple research studies that one researcher had overseen never broke down the outcomes by demographic. When the presenters asked the audience for feedback at the end, I decided to see if others would note the discrepancy, as I just tend to talk a lot. After no one mentioned it, I shared that the presenter's stated goal wasn't even attempted and shared other missed opportunities. Many heads turned and nodded, and I was met with words of thanks and prayer hands by one of the speakers for, quote, naming what had happened. The dynamic in the room became incredibly awkward for the presenters, and they fumbled to squeeze in discussions about Black and brown people as an afterthought. Following this, people raised their hands with questions and experiences of how their clients' care didn't fully align with what was presented either. The speakers closed the session by thanking the audience, especially me, and giving me another round of prayer hands. Again, incredibly awkward. Afterward, many of the participants approached me to talk about their clients and their own experiences as Black and brown clinicians, and appreciated that I had spoken up, as they were feeling alone in that room and seeing how their clients weren't mentioned. To me, it is so worth it to make things awkward. Unfortunately, it was only the first time a group of white speakers would say that they intended to center BIPOC folks only to never mention us again. It was also the first of many times that people would use the word naming and also centering in an incredibly awkward and unnecessary way. Another phrasing we heard was from cis people telling us that they were, quote, not a person of trans experience. 6 whole words and 10 syllables when all we needed was one. Elijah and I went to 3 different presentations about BMI. The first was a panel of medical students from different institutions who presented both literature reviews and their own findings on the impact of BMI and gender-affirming surgery outcomes. Their findings consistently showed that BMI should not be used as a reason to deny someone care. The following hour was a panel of individuals close to the topic, someone with lived experience, an eating disorder therapist who discussed the higher rates of eating disorders in trans and non-binary people, and then 2 obesity medicine doctors. If you heard my conversation with Calvin, you'll recall that we had no idea what an obesity medicine doctor does. I now have some idea, and it aligns nicely with Dr. Robert Lustig's goal of metabolic health. The doctors continually discuss metabolic surgery, which seems to be a name shift from weight loss surgery, and how this and other metabolic optimizations can benefit trans people prior to gender-affirming surgery in the context of meeting BMI surgery requirements. It felt very much like the conference was painting this panel as a 2-sided presentation. The idea that restriction and eating disorders, for people of all sizes, are inherently harmful and contraindicated for healing, directly followed by people talking about how important weight loss is for the health of trans people. It ended with me and Elijah having more questions than answers. The third BMI presentation was the following day for the entire conference and had the addition of 2 surgeons who provide gender-affirming surgery to all patients, regardless of BMI. They were alongside the same eating disorder therapists and obesity medicine doctors. There really wasn't a summary statement or even a take-home message. It let anyone and everyone agree with the presentation because someone up there had reinforced what they already believed, which is the case when topics are thought to be debatable or have equally weighted aspects. It's how the status quo is maintained. In all of those presentations, BMI itself was described as controversial, which is just confusing. It's an equation used to assess the health of someone. I did get to wear my arts and crafts manager badge that I had made. It nicely complemented my red dress at the Diva party Saturday night, and I felt very seen when one of my new friends told me I was trolling those in attendance. Here's my initial conference debrief with Isaac, Elijah, and Gus from the living room of their Airbnb. And today I am sitting with...
My name is Isaac. I use they, them pronouns, and I work at Lion Martin.
I'm Elijah. I use he, him. I'm a study coordinator at the Hunter Alliance for Research and Translation at Hunter College.
I'm Gus Klein, he, him. I'm a research associate professor at Hunter College, and I'm also the research director at Lion Martin.
So I'll just start by naming that in this conversation, I'm not a person of trans experience. Is there anything that you all feel like you have to name going forward?
I would like to name that I am a person of trans experience.
And anything for the 2 of you?
I'd like to name that I am a white, binary, trans, masculine individual who is also Jewish and anti-Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
Both, all of that.
All of the above. Mm-hmm. Great. And prayer hands all around. Thank you. Thank you for just sharing and naming that. We'll do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of this episode. Okay. So in the BMI presentation, the person who started as someone of lived experience, having had a BMI too high, in quotation marks, to qualify for gender-affirming surgery. Went through their whole journey. And something that I thought Elijah pointed out that was amazing was that the use of suicidal ideation is the reason for getting gender-affirming care.
Yeah. It feels like often when people talk about gender-affirming care and surgery, it's seen as like a mental health treatment. So in this case, it was that this person had suicidal ideation, and it was at least in part a result of not having access to surgery. And I think that's a very real experience for some people, but I don't I think that seeing surgery as the solution for suicidal ideation.
It's not a treatment.
Yeah, like surgery is not mental health treatment. What surgery does is it changes your body, and the other things can change as part of that, but surgery does the one thing, which is create a surgical outcome, which is a change to someone's body.
And I think maybe what you're also getting at is that when you use it as a treatment for suicidal ideation, what happens when the person has surgery and they still have those feelings, because it wasn't, that may have been a component of it, but it wasn't actually the complete picture of why. And then you set that person up for a lot of pain and hardship. And like, there's tons of research now, there's tons of in practice that people live with suicidal ideation. We also live in a really horrible time. And so like, even if you have a moment when you feel so tired and you're like, yeah, what else is there for me? Especially when time after time after again, you're just constantly beat down.
And it also creates a sense of urgency that I think people then feel so afraid of the potential for suicide that perhaps the health education that people should get before surgery and like making sure that things are in place to set someone up for success are not paid as much attention to, because the concern is about the suicidal ideation, which is of course a concern, but I think the less emphasis on the other things is concerning. And I think also then, like, what about people who are not suicidal and also want surgery? It feels like there's another group of people that are not being prioritized or paid as much attention to.
And it also legitimizes people to lie in order to get care. And that's not a reason for people to assess more or do more. It's to change the system. It isn't to say what people are doing is actually a form of resilience and resistance. That they're saying, like, I'm going to play your game. I'm going to play along. It's not going to actually serve anything in my life other than me getting what I need. But and the sad part is that all the other shit that I have to deal with, I can't find anyone to talk to, because all you want to do is talk to me about this one part of myself. I think it's why we also have a lot of folks just running around just being like, this is... I have to follow this pattern that I have, that in order to be trans, I must go to this step and this step and this step and this step. And then the people who are like, hey, we're a little different, we then categorize over here. And like, that doesn't even take into account to all of us over here where like, there's just, it's not even it's like, so.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that categorization? You all, the third category or?
Yeah. I feel like the focus on non-binary identity has really made it, or like such intense focus on it has really made it into like a third gender category, which I think defeats the purpose of being non-binary. Like, you're not adding to, the binary and just adding something else. It's like you're in between it. You don't even think you have a gender. Like, it's just so much varied things. And you're just making it into this other box that you have to fit in again. And there's certain requirements that you have to look like to be non-binary.
Yes.
That can be really harmful and feed into other things that, trans people experience in general. So it's just really defeating the purpose. And it makes me upset. And sometimes I just don't want to even be identified in that community because it's not what I believe in. So that's my take.
Really?
Yeah. Like, it turns being non-binary into another binary where it's binary versus non-binary.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's pitting us all against each other too. Yeah. It's like, and I think it's passing and realness and who's really trans and who's really non-binary and what does fluidity really mean? And like, and all of this, like, I think that I think it's interesting how that plays out.
Like, thinking again about like suicidal ideation and that being because of barriers to surgery or just like not yet having had surgery, that is talked about a lot in terms of like mental health impacts and implications of like barriers to access to surgery, it reinforces the idea that to be trans is to like suffer.
Right.
And that you need to suffer as a part of being trans, and that is a part of like the journey to surgery. And then surgery resolves that suffering. And that is like, it's not true that everyone suffers prior to surgery. People may just want to get surgery because it's part of their like embodiment desires. But, and then also, if you suffer before surgery and you are still suffering after surgery, like how are you not correctly trans? Or like why? And it also looks at surgery as just the resolution.
Yeah.
And like the solution, Gus has made this point that it's not about just like the individual like suffering because of gender dysphoria and that being resolved by surgery. It's also about like societal transphobia. Like that also contributes to like why people still may not feel great even after having had surgery. And it's not because the surgery was not quote unquote successful. It's because it's hard to just be trans.
I had a thought, because also, I don't want to say surgery can cause suffering, but like the post-operative complications and not having people trained to take care of that. Surgery can resolve one thing, but they can also cause other issues. And if you're not informed of that as like something that could happen, not that I'm discouraging surgery, but it's not like a Band-Aid solution type thing. Or that I feel like the other fears that happen is like, am I going to find somebody who's able to take care of my new body correctly? And the complications that might arise, or like, you know, like all those things can also contribute negatively. Not to, I support surgery, but you know, I'm just saying like that's something that I feel like people don't talk enough about.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about is like the importance of the information piece and that education, and that it's not that we should be scared of complications or that complications can't be managed. It's that we need to know before surgery that there is the potential for those to happen and what we can do if those happen.
And honestly, the way you can say it to people is, I would not be providing you the best care or preparing you for surgery if I did not give you this information. And like saying it from a like, I want to give you this, not because I want to scare you, not because I want to dissuade you, but because I want you to know what could happen. And
that like happened to just wrap us back around into BMI. The two bits of it, like consent and expectations, but also like, do you have representation on your website of like what an actual outcome would look like? So I'm not expecting to look like a thin person who's just had surgery.
Right. Yeah. And the reasons often that are given for having BMI thresholds or not allowing fat people to access surgery is because of the potential for the higher risk of complications. But there's not the conversation about what those complications are and the fact that often those complications are manageable.
Yeah.
And it feels like then there comes into the paternalism of like, we shouldn't let patients have access to surgery because of the complications, instead of it being a process of informed consent whereby patients who are fat and may have a higher risk of complications, whether or not that data is good is another topic of discussion or another question, but just informing those patients and then preparing them for what those complications may mean in terms of their postoperative care. And that's actually going through a process of informed consent and upholding patient autonomy rather than just barring people from accessing surgery, which is not allowing people to have autonomy over their bodies.
Yeah, and it also may mean that like people aren't actually being prepared of how, like if you do have more skin folds, or if you do have more and you need to move your body around in order to clean properly because of that stigma, because people don't touch fat people in healthcare, because people are grossed out and you can tell when, you know, right? You're like, so of course they're not saying you're going to have to lift this up and you're going to really have to clean because you know why? This is why. Because of infection, which is a normal part of healing, that because your body is responding, like as opposed to saying you're fat and you're more, I think that like we talk a lot about like what is the surgeon's skill level of working and doing surgery on fat people. And like, also I've been told by some surgeon that I basically been said that they don't want to operate on fat people because they don't want them posting their pictures on the internet because they don't want to be associated with that. And that to me is why plastic surgeons it's really, really challenging because you're doing this thing where you're like, if someone's posting their results on the internet, do you know how euphoric, I'm going to use the new term, gender euphoria, that like, they're so excited and so proud and so happy. And you know what? They're so grateful that you did that, and you don't deserve that. You don't deserve that if you're literally like cringing because you're fat phobic.
Mm.
Like, and that, as a fat person, to also have a plastic surgeon say that, when I'm just like, you do know who you're talking to. Like, literally, I like am shocked, where I'm just kind of like, do you not like see?
But not you.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. You have had surgery. You're fine.
You're fine.
Yes.
So this was Isaac's first like capital P professional conference. And what are your reflections?
Oof. I was genuinely disappointed, both in the food and the quality of the research that was being shown or presented on. Because to me, and where I work and where I've been working for the past like almost 3 years, it's just like part of our process or things that we already consider. And it's like kind of our framework of the clinic of like being aware of certain things, or, you know, we have the health of every size, like, and we don't stigmatize people, and we don't use terms that are shitty, like quote unquote obesity, like things like that, like are so, you know, normalized where I work. And it's not something I double think about. And the fact that they're presenting on this and that is their finding was just kind of baffling to me. I'm like, yes, and like, what else are you providing that's new? But then I realized that is the new thing, which is scary, because I'm like, wow, we're really behind. And I was really excited to learn a lot. They need to center more people who've like lived this experience, and instead of just presenting on people and using people with that experience to like, tokenize trauma porn type of stuff. It was just really, and I shouldn't have been disappointed, because, you know, this is an institution and systems are shitty, but I thought maybe it would be slightly different. And yeah, it was something. All right.
Yeah. I remember you saying they're using obesity, but they actually like mean it. It's not like in quotation.
Yeah. Like they are like, the people who were speaking were like from obesity medicine. And it was like, we have all these things. And I was like, oh, like, y'all think this is real. Yeah. And even when they're presenting about it being like, they'll even say like, we know this is racist, whatever. We're just using another term that is equivalent to it. You know, like, it's just, I was like, what is the point of your presentation? And like, yeah, it was.
And it's interesting too, because on one of the projects that I'm working on with Gus, when I was talking to mental health providers about how research informs their work, because the couple of therapists that I interviewed were trans, and they were like, it feels like the research often feels very behind like what we already know, and it's already restating what we already know. But everything feels just like it's reflecting what people already know, and it's not adding anything new or novel to like the conversations. Yeah. And it does feel disappointing, because I feel like the idea of conferences is that you're presenting like novel research and like ideas and opportunity to collaborate. But a lot of the people who are being platformed are like cis medical students, especially in like the surgical literature, and like surgical presentations, and are people who have not been like embedded in the world either because they are trans or because they have been doing research in the field for a long time or have been working in the field for a long time, but also people who have been working in the field for a long time, especially when they're not trans, but even sometimes when they are, haven't really moved beyond like kind of basic ideas or like their own conception, instead of being open to like other perspectives beyond their own.
What were some red flags for you on like why a presenter was only in the research field and perhaps didn't have any trans friends?
This one presenter just kept saying vaginoplasty, which I've never... Gender dysmorphia. And I thought maybe it was like a one-time slip because he was nervous, but he said it 3 times. So I was like, oh, he's serious about this. Yeah. And then I didn't feel inspired to like want to talk to people, because I'm like, what am I going to talk to you about? Yes. Like I have like... there's nothing that I'm excited to talk to you about because you're not showing me anything. So it's like I was supposed to network, but I'm like, there's nobody here that I want to network with because apart from the people that I'm already staying with. But it's just like, yeah, it was just bad. Yeah.
And what do you think these professional conferences are for, or who are they for?
To get credits.
Credits for sure, but
yeah, I think that's true.
platforming.
I think it's also platforming. I think it's also, I do think for some people, especially people that don't live on the coast, that it is so important that they come to this so they know they're not alone and they meet other people who are like in rural areas or in areas where they are the only one. And I think that I wish that those voices, those experiences were centered more. Through all of this chaos, the people who really are committed and want to do this work well, they will stay and everyone else will fall off. And it's those people, and through that, and this is only me being optimistic, and I'm so pessimistic, we will build a better version of care together, as opposed to continuing to just perpetuate all of this shit. And that I keep being like, while you are all focusing on this shit, the rest of us are going to be continuing to do it. And that to me is like, that's like fundamental. Like, I just kind of feel like you just put your head down and you keep like slogging through because, 20 years ago, people bought hormones off the internet. We gave each other shots. I have friends now we're all in different positions because now some are nurse practitioners, some are doctors. So now we also have the ability to actually prescribe the medication so people can stockpile because that is what people in our community are doing. And that is what we text about. Because in absence of all of your arguing and I'm under attack, and yes, you could absolutely lose your license, and I don't know your situation, just as you don't know mine, but you assume you do. Like, I'm not going to judge you if you need to take care of yourself and your family, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still going to be here, and that there aren't going to be people who are going to be here with me and with all of us. And like, I don't want to spend time. I don't want to waste time because we don't have time to waste. Like that to me is what I think can really happen. And that's what inspires me and keeps me going. Because if I was to just be at this conference where I constantly saw how people were suicidal and how we have to watch our language. Yeah, because your language sucks and none of we understand at all what the fuck you're talking about, the goddamn gender galaxy. And fucking like...
Wait, did you hear that today? Say
well, no, well, like where how people talk about the unicorn and and the fucking galaxy and like the euphoria. Yes. I'm like, oh my God. It's because what I think it is for a majority of people, and specifically the people who think they are trying to rebirth us, is that it is so far from their ability to understand that we exist and that we're okay. Or like they can't really understand. To some extent, I feel like we're like so damaged that they're just like, we have to fix you and whatever you want.
The savior part.
And like, and that in many ways that's become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that it makes me want to vomit. Like I'm sorry, I know.
Don't be sorry about needing to vomit. That's a basic need. Any last conference thoughts? It could be where you see this field, where you would like the field to go, where you are in the field.
Yeah. I would like the field to shift to doing advocacy because, science is not objective. There's always bias in it. And like, who's doing this research? Mostly who are presenting were cis people. So like, I feel like that is very much needed. Like, science is not something that comes from above, whatever Donna Haraway said, something like that. But like, yeah, it's, you can't separate science with like internal bias, and like, you can't be objective. And saying that at this conference was very disappointing. And that's what I want to do, is I want to do advocacy work because I think it's important. I'd have nothing else to add.
That's great.
Yeah. And I think it feels often like there's a particular focus on like certain individual people and their work rather than focusing on like how can we collaborate to do that like good work together and to do advocacy. And I think that the focus should be less on individuals and more so on like how do we make things better for the community that the conference is like allegedly intended to serve.
But then we'd be activists, Elijah, and we can't have that because trans activists are rooting this field. The end.
Literally, I'm cutting it. No, I'm cutting it there. The end. The end. Thanks so much to Isaac, Elijah, and Gus. We're already conspiring about potential presentations and collaborations for the future. I'll compile my interviews with the surgeons, therapists, and have an in-depth reflection episode sometime in the future. Next week, I'll bring my dad back for a conversation about some of his experiences in the civil rights movement and lessons he's taken with him. In light of current events, I want to dig into humanity and the dehumanization of outgroups and how it's intentional and systemic. I want to talk about how he views the liberation of all people. Before we go, a reminder that the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24 hours a day by phoning 988. The best way to support this show is to follow, rate, and review. Until next time, make it awkward. This has been an episode of Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. This podcast is sponsored by the Legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services and a production of The Body Politic. It is edited and mixed by the terrific Jen Jacobs.